Sometimes a random coincidence of circumstances leads to the death of a person. It seemed as though a cruel fate had taken a loving mother from her children and a faithful wife from her husband, but there were too many strange coincidences. As the police officers in Denver are used to knowing, coincidences are too suspicious when it comes to death. So they began an investigation that would take years to conclude. The 44-year-old mother and wife was found in her own bathtub. At first glance, it looked like she had simply passed out and suffocated. The woman died without an apparent reason, and there were no signs of an attack. This happened in March 2015, and the case became a challenging task for the police, as there were few clues and almost no traces. The investigation began to consider several scenarios at once. One of them suggested that the woman might have lost consciousness due to an overdose of medication. Given the absence of signs of an unauthorized person, the possibility of an accident was also considered. After all, Stacy Feldman could have simply slipped on wet tiles or suffered a seizure. However, many people were convinced it wasn't an accident. The police officers were unaware that it would take a tremendous effort to prove the murder case. Stacy Feldman was born in Indiana, USA, in 1970. She was the third child in the family, with sisters named Elizabeth and Susan. The children grew up in a friendly environment surrounded by understanding and love. The sisters supported each other throughout their lives and always found understanding from their parents. When Stacy's older sister became pregnant and had a child, the younger sister moved in with her without being asked to help raise the child. At that time, the older sister was divorced and solely responsible for herself. The family member lived in another city, so this decision was rather adventurous. For this purpose, the younger sister traveled from Chicago to be closer to her niece and her mother. Despite the increased workload, Stacy didn't complain about life. The pursuit of her own family and love was not foreign to her. During one of her travels, she met a man named Robert Feldman in Montreal. The spark ignited between them, and the young couple began a relationship. However, they met secretly from the family and got married in Montreal without informing their relatives because they anticipated family disapproval. Stacy took her partner's last name. The wedding was a small private party attended only by their closest friends. Afterward, the two moved to Denver, Colorado. Despite the secrecy, their bond proved strong. And the relatives didn't find out about the marriage right away. In the 10 years they were together, the marriage produced 2 children. At the time of the tragic events described, Stacy was a respectable, loving mother and a faithful wife. She actively participated in community life and got along with everyone. She had no enemies who would wish her dead. However, she suffered from an illness that enlarged her heart, and she was forced to take medication. On the morning of March 1, 2015, Stacy felt ill after a party with friends the night before, so she stayed in bed since the morning. Her husband took the children to church school alone at around 8:30 a.m. The mother was supposed to pick up the children at noon and later go with a group of friends to a small local carnival. However, when no one came to pick up the children at noon, the teacher called Stacy, but she didn't answer the phone. So, the school called her husband, Robert. After a while, he came to pick up the children and took them himself. They went to the carnival together, expecting to meet Stacy there. At 4 p.m., they returned home. The husband later recalled that when he returned with the children, he heard water running upstairs. He decided to check on his wife because she didn't respond to his calls. Robert went upstairs, opened the bathroom door, and was shocked to find his wife dead in the water-filled bathtub. He immediately sent the children to the neighbors so they wouldn't see their mother in such a state. Robert then called 911 and reported finding his wife's lifeless body in the bathroom. During the emergency call, he was instructed on first aid measures. The man followed the instructions, pulling his wife's body out of the bathtub onto the floor, where he tried to revive her while talking to the specialist on the phone. When the paramedics arrived, they moved the victim to a neighboring bedroom, where they again attempted first aid, but it was too late. Stacy was pronounced dead at the scene around 4 p.m. Shortly after, police officers were called to the scene. The officers arrived within minutes and immediately began investigating the circumstances of the death. In the first few minutes, they suspected that the woman had not died without assistance. The bathroom was clean and tidy, with no signs of a struggle. It was even too clean, which was one of the first reasons for the investigators' concern. Although Robert dragged his wife's wet body onto the bathroom floor, there were no traces of water on the floor. It seemed as if Robert had cleaned thoroughly before the police arrived. The towels were neatly hung in the bathroom, and the toiletries were scattered on the shelf next to the bath. They managed to find a damp cloth used to wipe the floor, but why would someone waste precious time cleaning instead of helping? Despite the cleanliness and the absence of signs of a struggle, Stacy had clearly suffered multiple injuries. Numerous bruises and contusions were found on her body, but none could be the cause of death. They all seemed too minor to injure the woman. The investigators questioned Robert to determine the circumstances of his wife's last days. He stated that they had been at a party at a friend's house the day before her death, where Stacy had smoked marijuana, which is legal in that state. She had also consumed alcohol. Therefore, she felt unwell in the morning and stayed in bed while her husband took care of the children. Robert also mentioned his wife's health issues, including cardiovascular problems, an enlarged heart, and arthritis. To combat the discomfort, Stacy took fentanyl, prescribed by doctors. Numerous spots were found on her body, small bruises that could have come from a fall or attempts to revive the victim. Could the woman have died from taking too much of the medication or losing balance and suffering an unfortunate fall? According to the police, only an autopsy could answer this question. In the meantime, the investigators discovered several other suspicious facts. A watch encrusted with gold and silver was found on the woman's wrist, a piece of jewelry Stacy used to signify her high status in her business. Why, then, would she shower with it and risk damaging the valuable jewelry? Although Robert actively supported the police, he was immediately considered the main suspect. After all, spouse murders are not uncommon, and he had found his wife's body. Superficially, everything seemed plausible, but the widow's behavior was somewhat unsettling. The investigation contacted the emergency dispatchers to find out how Robert behaved during the call. According to experts, he was very anxious and in a state of shock. The man screamed into the phone, was nervous, and even cried when he talked about seeing his wife's body. He tried to follow the instructions to provide first aid, but the widow's state of shock hindered the process even more, said the phone dispatcher. Despite the police's suspicions, Robert received much support from family and friends. However, in his conversations with the investigators, he answered some questions evasively and couldn't remember some details of the incident. Even more bizarre was his desire to refuse an autopsy and bury his deceased wife as soon as possible. However, the suspicion of murder ruled out this option. So Stacy's body was sent for an autopsy and ended up on the coroner's table. After examining the body, the expert could not determine the exact cause of the woman's death. According to the expert, Stacy might have simply suffocated after losing consciousness in the bathtub. However, she had numerous bruises and abrasions, most of which could have been caused when she was pulled out of the tub for resuscitation. Some of the bruises on her body matched fingerprints that might have been left when someone held her down. To get to the bottom of the truth, the coroner had to conduct further analyses and examine the victim's body more closely. More specialists were expected to deal with the case, delaying the investigation significantly and making the work of law enforcement more difficult. At this point, they had no evidence to point to the perpetrator. The toxicological examination found various drugs in her body, but they were all prescription medications the woman had taken on a doctor's advice. More importantly, no traces of alcohol or substances were found in her bloodstream that should have remained after consuming alcohol with friends the night before. This indicated that Robert had lied. This fact was the first conclusive evidence of his deception. Others followed later. The next discrepancies in the widow's statements were discovered after talking to the head and staff of the church school where the couple's children attended. The teacher claimed that it was not the parents but a family friend who was supposed to pick up the children. This was stated by the father himself when he received a call around noon. This was the second contradiction, as Robert convinced the police that it was the wife who was supposed to pick up the schoolchildren. It turned out that the man knew in advance that this was impossible and warned the teacher that another familiar person would pick up the children. Since this person did not show up, the teacher called Stacy and Robert. The man was very late, arriving only around 1 p.m. He postponed the pickup time for the schoolchildren several times. The father said his friend was busy and would come as soon as he was free. Stacy couldn't respond at that time because she wasn't home. Could the main suspect have used this time to clean up the traces of violence in his house? According to the teachers at the church school, Robert looked quite strange when he arrived. Despite the cool weather, he wore shorts and a t-shirt and seemed very irritated and excited, which was unusual for him. On normal days, he was always calm and reasonable. To delve deeper into this tangled case, the investigators requested recordings of the emergency call made by the main suspect. They wanted to find evidence or inconsistencies in the statements that could allow them to bring the man to justice. When the investigators listened to the call, they heard a toilet flush in the background. They suspected that the perpetrator might have been disposing of evidence at that time. They also heard no confirmation that the widower tried to administer first aid to his wife. He was explained how to perform CPR, but he repeatedly agreed with the operator without background noise or the heavy breathing typical of such actions. It seemed that the husband neither provided first aid nor tried to save his wife, probably because he was sure of her death and desired a tragic outcome. Gradually, a likely motive emerged. As the sole beneficiary of a life insurance policy, Robert could expect a substantial sum of $750,000 in the event of her death. The investigators then turned to Robert again. The police tried to determine why he lied about his wife's consumption of alcohol and other substances the day before her death. The investigators were also interested in the spots on her body that, although they appeared as if she had been pulled from the bathtub and given first aid, still looked suspicious. There was still the possibility that the bruises occurred during Stacy's struggle for her own life. The investigator examining the crime called Robert to discuss some of the points the coroner had identified. At the same time, the investigator wanted to ask some tricky questions that could lead the murderer to the truth. First, the investigator wanted to know how his wife had been lying, face up or face down, when he found her in the bathroom. The man couldn't remember these details. He immediately began to explain that he was in shock when he discovered his wife's body, losing his speech and memory. According to the widower, he immediately tried to pull her out of the bath, quickly and with all his might, perhaps not carefully because it was an emergency, causing bruises. It's known that a person who is unconscious is quite heavy, making it difficult to handle a breathless body, even for a strong man. This way, Robert tried to justify the appearance of bruises on his wife's body. However, the investigators did not receive concrete answers to their questions. They were then confronted with contradictory statements from the widower himself and his acquaintances. Initially, the family man claimed he was not at home because he left at 8:30 a.m. to take the children to school and returned only at 3 p.m. later. Witnesses reported seeing Robert at home that fateful morning. According to the man, he should have come by the house around noon to walk his dog. Could Robert have killed his wife during this time? It was also unclear how much time the man had spent in the house. It was possible that he had only used the time when the children's teachers tried to contact him to erase the traces of his crime. Thus, the main suspect's statement changed again. According to Robert, he took the children to the church school and stayed there for a short service. Then he went to training and changed at home afterward. At that time, the widower did not see his wife and stayed about 20 minutes, not disturbing her because he thought she was still resting after the previous night's party. The man also said he hadn't heard any water noises in the bathroom. The main suspect's statements did not convince the investigators. Robert described the events of the last few months in detail, but nothing seemed unusual. The police decided to see how he reacted by mentioning the questionable autopsy results. The widower claimed he didn't know what could have happened to his wife but believed she might have fainted for health reasons and simply drowned in the water. Again, nothing suspicious could be detected, but the police officers were ready to go to the limit. In fact, the only problem the coroner identified was a kidney condition that caused her kidneys not to function properly. The coroner could not identify any injuries that could have caused her death. The investigation stalled for 4 months. Finally, the Denver Police Department received new information confirming the suspicion that Robert Feldman was involved in his wife's death. The information came from an unexpected source, a woman who did not know Stacy. Her name was Susan McBride. According to the informant, she met a man on Tinder in 2015 named Robert Wolf, who claimed to be a meat dealer from Denver. The new witness said they began an online relationship that led to a single date. Although Robert described himself as divorced, Susan found out he was not who he claimed to be. Since she wanted to continue the relationship, she investigated Robert's personal data and found that Robert Feldman, a married man, was behind this name. She decided to email Stacy to accuse her husband of cheating. This message was discovered in the victim's personal records. Surprisingly, it was sent at 6:20 p.m. on March 1st, just a few hours before Stacy's death. The women exchanged brief messages and decided to call each other. A short phone conversation between them ended at 9 a.m. They parted on friendly terms. Stacy thanked Susan and promised to end her relationship with her cheating partner. After that, they didn't contact each other again. Susan continued to look for relationships online. 3 months later, she had another unsuccessful date. During this time, she remembered Stacy and wondered how her relationship with her partner ended. However, instead of finding the divorced woman online, she stumbled upon an obituary. She then inquired about the details of the crime that had occurred. She discovered that the murder was probably still unsolved. The obituary did not mention Stacy Feldman's cause of death. Everything seemed more than suspicious. A woman who received evidence of her husband's infidelity and whose life was insured for $750,000 died the morning she decided to end the marriage. Of course, the police did not consider this a coincidence. In October 2017, the Denver police brought in an independent pathologist, a renowned specialist in strangulation cases. After a reanalysis of the victim's body, the new expert could prove that she had died a violent death. It happened in the morning between 10 and 12 o'clock. The last text message from her phone was sent at 9:59 a.m., after which she was no longer able to pick up her children from school. According to the police, Robert visited her at that time, and an argument ensued. In a fit of rage, he strangled his wife and later made it look like an accident. It turned out that the previous coroner who conducted the autopsy had not done his job properly. He had overlooked a number of important pieces of evidence and had not conducted a complete autopsy. For the involved independent expert, the murder was obvious. In February 2018, Robert Feldman was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He pleaded not guilty and, in the absence of direct evidence, was placed under house arrest on a $1 million bail. However, this did not lead to a fair verdict. The justice system was stalled again and moved very slowly. Hearings in this case were postponed no less than 6 times. During the same period, the victim's family fought with the man over the inheritance. Thanks to the insurance payout, he could hire top-notch lawyers who were among the best experts in criminal cases, for which he paid more than $550,000. However, a probate attorney in Denver prevented Robert from using the money. Money from a criminally obtained insurance policy cannot be used for defense in court. Therefore, the widower had to rely on a public defender. He lost the case but subsequently appealed to the state Supreme Court. He won this procedure because the money he received was deemed legal. As a result, the accounts were unblocked, and the man could use the money in full. In the spring of 2020, he hired a new expensive lawyer who was even better prepared for such cases. The trial in this case was scheduled for April 2020. During this time, the defender secured bail for him. Robert was to remain under house arrest and could only leave the house for serious reasons, such as seeing a doctor. His defender was supposed to handle the delivery of groceries and all necessities. However, the suspect moved freely around the city and covered hundreds of miles on his bicycle. Due to the pandemic, the hearing was postponed again. During this time, Robert continued his normal life as if nothing had happened. The victim's family was shocked by what was happening. They sat back and waited for justice under the pressure of the closure orders. Meanwhile, the murderer roamed free and had nothing to fear. The man was constantly on his bike and registered multiple accounts under different names on dating sites. The widower enjoyed his life, meeting other women, and clearly had no intention of going to jail. It is known that he dated at least 5 women while under house arrest. One of them came home for a date and later decided to notify the police. The woman reported that she intuitively felt threatened throughout the encounter but didn't know what it was about and ignored her intuition. However, when they were near the pool in the backyard, Robert attacked and raped her. She initially decided not to report it to the police but became interested in the story of Robert Wolf, who her new friend claimed to be. She managed to find out his real name and surname and also learned that the man might be involved in his wife's death. After that, she had no more doubts, and the victim of a rapist and murderer turned to the Denver police. The investigation, which lasted more than 3 years, finally gathered all the evidence required for an indictment. Several important witnesses also came forward, helping uncover the crime. However, even at this stage, the hearings were repeatedly postponed. Finally, they began in April 2022. Robert Feldman was accused of intentionally murdering his wife. The prosecution presented solid evidence that the man had long been beating his wife, but the cause of death was strangulation. The defense insisted it was an accident in the husband's absence. The woman had an enlarged heart due to illness and suffered a seizure, causing her to faint in the full bathtub. Since she could not free herself and no one was there to help, Stacy simply drowned. The blood stains found in the bathtub upon closer inspection were minor and attributed to her period. The trial lasted 9 days, after which the jury deliberated for nearly 3 hours. The result was a unanimous decision, and Robert was found guilty of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole, and all his appeals were rejected. Thank you for watching, and take care.
On a cold February morning in 2014, police in a small town in Virginia began searching for a missing student, 21-year-old Samantha Shrestha. The model daughter and honor student had suddenly disappeared after an evening out with a friend. Her parents, accustomed to daily phone calls, did not hear her voice for the first time. Initially, it seemed like a random misunderstanding. But soon, circumstances began to form a chilling picture. Samantha Shrestha was born in Nepal to Dhrorani and Raja S. Shrestha. Her parents placed great importance on education and raising their children in an atmosphere of respect for tradition. When Samantha was 3 years old, her family decided to emigrate to the United States in search of better opportunities. Their choice fell on the small town of Vienna, Virginia, known for its friendly attitude towards immigrants, especially those from South Asia. Samantha's adaptation to the new country was successful. Although her family continued to speak their native Nepali at home, the girl quickly learned English and seamlessly integrated into the school community. Her teachers attested to her excellent learning ability, and her classmates remembered her as a smiling and friendly girl. During her school years, Samantha developed a special interest in the exact sciences, particularly biology and psychology, which laid the foundation for her later professional interests. A key event in her life was the tragic death of her older sister Manisha, who died in an accident. This incident deeply affected Samantha and her family, but for the girl herself, it became an incentive to develop further. She decided to dedicate herself to medicine to help people and prevent tragedies. In high school, Samantha actively participated in volunteer projects, allowing her to recognize the importance of medicine in practice. After high school, she enrolled at the University of Virginia, where she chose biology and psychology as her main subjects. Samantha was always highly motivated and well-organized. She set ambitious goals and achieved them. Her dream was to study medicine, become a doctor, and contribute to improving people's lives. Jessica Ewing grew up in a completely different environment. She spent her childhood in a strict Baptist family in Aston, Maryland. Her parents raised her according to rigid religious principles, where any deviation from established norms was considered unacceptable. During her childhood, Jessica experienced a personal trauma that significantly affected her psychological state. It was an episode of violence by a family friend. She never spoke to her family about this experience and tried to hide her experiences. When she attended university, Jessica tried to detach herself from the oppressive religious environment and focus on her studies. She chose 2 main subjects, biology and fish farming. Her inner conflicts, however, did not let her go. Jessica began to realize that her attraction to girls contradicted the beliefs instilled in her by her family. This caused her constant anxieties, which she couldn't cope with alone. At the University of Virginia in 2012, Jessica met Samantha. Their first encounter took place during a university lecture. Samantha impressed Jessica with her energy and kindness. Gradually, their communication grew closer. They often discussed their studies, exchanged opinions on scientific topics, and prepared for classes together. For Samantha, friendship was part of her open and friendly nature. For Jessica, however, it quickly took on a different hue. Her interest in Samantha began to cross the boundaries of normal interaction. The attention she paid to her friend often seemed too personal to her. But Samantha, busy with her studies and building her career, didn't notice that the friendship was becoming something more for Jessica. Thus began a relationship that would eventually play a key role in their lives. Jessica increasingly sought reasons to spend time with Samantha, while Samantha considered this part of a normal friendship. At that time, no one in their circle suspected that this relationship would one day lead to a tragedy. Meanwhile, Samantha developed a relationship with another person. She began a relationship with Scott Marcel, an older student focused on his law studies. Their relationship began with light contact but soon developed into something more serious. Scott was fascinated by Samantha from the first days, and despite her demanding studies, she paid him a lot of attention. The two supported each other in pursuing their ambitious goals, which only strengthened their relationship. For Jessica, the relationship between Samantha and Scott was a source of great distress. She felt jealousy that she couldn't openly express. It annoyed her that Samantha spent less and less time with her, preferring dates and meetings with Scott instead. Every small thing, such as the mention of Scott in a conversation, irritated Jessica and intensified her desire to be in the young man's place. Jessica withdrew more and more, avoiding talking about her feelings even with her closest friends. She felt that no one around her could understand her. The only place where she could express her feelings in any way was in her diary entries. In them, she described her pain and confusion. Over time, her emotional state began to affect her daily life. Jessica started avoiding Scott, taking care not to encounter him on campus. This was not only due to her jealousy, but also her fear that he might notice her behavior towards Samantha. At the same time, she tried to be a good friend to Samantha, but her inner tension prevented her from maintaining her former ease in communication. The situation was exacerbated by the fact that Samantha regarded Jessica exclusively as a friend. She could talk to her about personal topics, share her future plans with her, but she never saw their friendship as anything more. For Samantha, her romance with Scott took priority, and she tried to maintain as close a relationship with him as possible. This fact finally convinced Jessica that her feelings were unrequited. To cope with her growing inner discomfort, Jessica sought help from university counseling. But even after that, her emotional instability did not subside. Every time Samantha mentioned Scott or talked about her romantic plans, Jessica felt overwhelmed by anger and resentment. She began to blame herself for her feelings but couldn't find a way to get rid of them. One of the turning points in Jessica and Samantha's relationship was a phase that began with a casual conversation. During one of their meetings, they talked about movies, and Samantha mentioned that she had never seen a particular film. Jessica, pleased at the opportunity to spend more time with her, offered to watch the film together. For Samantha, it was a friendly suggestion which she agreed to without much thought. For Jessica, in turn, it was an opportunity to get closer to Samantha, hoping to develop their relationship. When they met on the agreed day, Jessica had meticulously prepared. She had thought of every detail to create a cozy atmosphere. She expected this meeting to take their relationship a step further. Samantha, on the other hand, approached the meeting calmly and serenely. This was the first sign of the difference in their perceptions. Jessica perceived the evening as an important event, while Samantha saw it as a casual movie night with a friend. While watching the film, Jessica felt increasingly tense. Her attention was not on the plot of the movie, but on Samantha, who was sitting next to her. It seemed to her that this was the perfect moment to finally express her feelings. At some point, she made a decision. Jessica interrupted the conversation about the film and made an uncertain move. She moved closer to Samantha and suggested they try a kiss, seemingly in jest. Samantha was surprised but didn't take it seriously. She viewed it as a kind of experiment dictated by curiosity. Without much thought, she agreed, considering it another unusual friendly prank. For Jessica, however, the moment was a confirmation of her hopes. She took the kiss as a sign that her feelings were reciprocated. After this episode, their perceptions of the situation drastically diverged. Samantha returned to her old life without much thought for what had happened. She continued to communicate with Jessica, not realizing that this moment had become something much bigger for her friend. Jessica, on the other hand, began to think about that evening more and more often, analyzing every detail. She looked for hidden signs in Samantha's words and actions that could confirm her fantasies of mutual feelings. From that moment on, Jessica's inner tension began to increase. She realized that Samantha did not perceive her as she wanted to be perceived. This discrepancy between expectations and reality caused her deep frustration. Attempts to find answers through communication with Samantha remained unsuccessful, which only intensified her emotional discomfort. The psychologist recommended medication for Jessica to stabilize her emotional state. She was prescribed medications that were supposed to reduce her anxieties and balance her mood swings. However, she did not notice much improvement. The problem was that Jessica did not want to tell the therapist the whole truth about her feelings, withholding the details of her relationship to Samantha. This prevented the therapist from correctly assessing her condition and offering effective help. At the same time, Jessica tried to find solace in talking with her friends. She spoke with them about her experiences, avoiding specifically mentioning Samantha, but gradually realized that the people around her could not offer the support she hoped for. Her descriptions of her emotional discomfort were dismissed as mere complaints, and her attempts to seek advice ended in general recommendations. This further intensified her feeling of isolation. Meanwhile, Samantha delved deeper into her studies. After being accepted into the University of Pennsylvania Medical School, she focused on preparing for her future studies. Her schedule became increasingly full and her priorities shifted to professional achievement. She spent less time with friends, including Jessica, and focused almost exclusively on her career. For her, this phase of life was the beginning of realizing her long-cherished dream of becoming a doctor. Against this backdrop, Jessica began to obsessively think about how she could restore her former intimacy with Samantha. She developed various communication scenarios in which she imagined explaining her feelings or trying to regain her friend's attention, but every conceived solution seemed inadequate to her. At some point, she began to think about more significant actions that could draw Samantha's attention back to her. One of the first indications of a fateful encounter was a conversation Jessica had with one of her friends. She mentioned that she wanted to arrange a special evening for Samantha so they could talk openly and clear up any unspoken feelings. She discussed the possible details of the meeting. Jessica made it clear that the meeting should be something Samantha would remember for a long time. At this point, her words sounded innocent, but later the conversation took on an ominous tone. On the evening of February 7, 2014, the friends arranged to meet at Samantha's house. Jessica meticulously prepared for this moment, as she saw the meeting as a chance to restore their former intimacy. She chose an outfit she considered appropriate for the special occasion and brought wine and dessert, hoping to create a relaxed atmosphere. For her, this evening was not just a friendly get-together, but an opportunity to express her feelings and perhaps receive a long-awaited answer. When Jessica arrived, her expectations began to crumble. Samantha greeted her in simple clothes without a hint of festive mood. She was wearing simple pajamas and slippers. For Samantha, it was just a normal evening in the company of a friend. She intended to spend time eating and talking, but nothing more. This contrast in the perception of the evening was the first blow for Jessica, who was already in an emotionally unstable state. As the evening progressed, the tension between the two increased. Jessica tried to start a conversation that she hoped would bring them closer. She alluded to their friendship, to how much Samantha meant. But Samantha, preoccupied with everyday topics, did not pay much attention to these words. At some point, Jessica tried to move to a more personal conversation by asking questions about Samantha's feelings for her. She did so cautiously, so as not to arouse suspicion, but her frustration grew with each evasive answer. The climax came when Samantha bluntly stated that their friendship held no romantic connotations for her. She explained that she regarded their interaction merely as a friendship and that the kiss was just an experiment for her. For Jessica, these words were the last straw. Her resentment and anger, which had been building up for months, erupted. She felt humiliated and rejected and could not accept that her feelings had been completely ignored. The conflict began in an escalated tone. Jessica accused Samantha of playing with her feelings and giving her false hope. Samantha, confused by this reaction, tried to calm her down, but this only worsened the situation. Jessica became more and more aggressive. Her words turned into shouts and her gestures became threatening. Samantha tried to de-escalate the situation by offering to end the conversation, but this only intensified Jessica's outburst of rage. At some point, Jessica lost control of her emotions. She grabbed Samantha and tried to force her to listen. A brief struggle ensued between the two, during which Jessica used violence. Her actions were spontaneous and uncontrolled. In a fit of rage, she grabbed Samantha and began to press. Jessica did not immediately realize what she was doing, and only when Samantha stopped resisting did she realize what had happened. Her hands loosened and she stepped back, looking at the body lying before her. The moment she realized what she had done led to panic. Jessica couldn't believe that her anger and resentment had led to such a tragic outcome. She realized that she had done something irreversible, and the first few minutes after the incident were filled with chaotic thoughts of how she could cover up what had happened. There was only one question swirling in her mind. What should she do next? Jessica's first step was to hide the body. She wrapped it in a sleeping bag she found in Samantha's apartment and dragged it to her car, which was parked outside. She hoped to hide the body in such a way that it would look like a disappearance rather than a murder. However, it was not easy to manage this alone. Jessica called two of her acquaintances, Kefir Brown and Michael Heller, and asked for their help. She explained that she had a serious problem but withheld details about what had happened. When the friends arrived, they immediately noticed her agitation. Jessica tried to convince them to help dispose of the body without giving details. Kefir agreed, but Michael was cautious, suspecting that the situation was much more serious than Jessica wanted it to appear. Nevertheless, they helped move the body and placed it in Samantha's car. Jessica expressed the intention to dispose of the body permanently, but the plan was not pursued further. The next day, Samantha's parents began to worry about her disappearance. Normally, she would check in with them, but this time she didn't answer the phone. They decided to contact the police and report their daughter missing. The police immediately launched an investigation, as she was a diligent student and her sudden disappearance seemed suspicious. Police officers noted that Samantha had gone out the previous evening and began searching for people who might have been with her the night before. Jessica realized she was under suspicion, as she was the last person to have seen Samantha. To avoid police attention, she appeared at the station with a lawyer and her parents, ostensibly to cooperate. During questioning, however, she refused to answer important questions, which made investigators suspicious. Her strange behavior attracted attention and she quickly became the main suspect. Concurrently, the police conducted a search of Samantha's apartment. The search revealed signs of a struggle and blood, indicating a violent incident. This confirmed the suspicion of a crime. Shortly thereafter, Samantha's car was impounded and her body was found inside. Jessica attempted to cover up the evidence, but her mistakes, including leaving footprints at the crime scene, quickly linked the police to the murder. A few days after Samantha's disappearance, Jessica was arrested. Her behavior raised even more questions. She was confused in her statements and clearly evaded explanations. Kefir and Michael were also summoned for questioning. Kefir admitted that he had helped move the body but insisted that he did not know the true cause of Samantha's death. Michael immediately informed the police that he found Jessica's actions suspicious and refused further help. Jessica's arrest was the first step in solving the crime. Investigations were also launched against her friends who were involved in hiding the body. However, it was Jessica's mistakes and her uncertain behavior that enabled the police to quickly uncover the truth. The investigation began, and with each passing day the facts became clearer and her guilt more apparent. Jessica's trial began in 2015 and attracted significant attention. The prosecution presented numerous pieces of evidence, including evidence of a struggle in Samantha's apartment, blood traces found at the crime scene, and surveillance footage showing Samantha's car, which Jessica drove on the day of her disappearance. Important evidence also included Samantha's belongings found in Jessica's car, among them her medical equipment and personal photos. During the hearing, Jessica initially denied her guilt, claiming her actions were caused by an emotional breakdown. However, under pressure from the evidence, she admitted her involvement in the murder. In her testimony, she described the motives for her actions. Jessica explained that her anger was triggered by feelings of rejection and humiliation when Samantha made it clear that she did not view their relationship as anything other than a friendship. She stated that at the time of the act, she was in a state of deep emotional despair that completely deprived her of self-control. A psychological report confirmed that Jessica showed signs of depression and emotional instability. However, the experts determined that she was aware of her actions at the time of the offense. This was crucial, as the court did not accept her condition as a mitigating circumstance. The prosecution emphasized that the murder was committed in cold blood and that attempts to cover up the traces suggested premeditated action. The defense tried to portray Jessica as a victim of inner conflicts, but the numerous pieces of evidence and her own confessions made this position incredible. The verdict was final. Jessica was found guilty of murder and concealing a body. She was sentenced to 80 years in prison, of which she must serve 45 years without parole. Additionally, she received another 5 years for attempting to cover up evidence of the crime. Kerr Brown received a lighter sentence for his help in hiding the body. The court sentenced him to 12 months in prison. The sentence, however, was later reduced to 28 days, as he cooperated with the investigation. Michael Heller was exonerated because he did not participate in the cover-up and immediately informed the police of his suspicions. The verdict evoked mixed feelings in Samantha's family. On one hand, they were relieved that the perpetrator had received the punishment she deserved. On the other hand, the loss was irreplaceable for them. After the verdict, Samantha's parents thanked the court and the police for the fair trial, but noted that nothing would bring their daughter back. The trial not only clarified the facts, but also served as a reminder of the importance of early intervention for emotional and psychological problems. The university where Samantha and Jessica studied launched a psychological counseling program for students to prevent such tragedies. Samantha's family experienced indescribable grief. Having lost their eldest daughter in an accident a few years earlier, the parents faced another tragedy, this time immeasurably more brutal. The loss of Samantha not only deprived them of their child, but also shattered their idea of security, trust, and justice. They were shocked that a woman they believed to be their daughter's friend could take such a step. The grief over the loss was accompanied by persistent feelings and the inability to process the tragedy. If you liked the video, please give it a like. That helps a lot with its distribution. Also, leave a comment to support the channel and recommend the video. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Thanks for watching and take care. The Jansen family seemed normal to everyone, caring, close-knit, always ready to support each other. But one day everything changed. Something so terrible happened in that house that even close friends couldn't believe it. Behind the secret lay events that shook the entire family and put the people around them into a complete state of shock. Police, friends, neighbors. Everyone tried to understand how this seemingly blameless family could fall apart and what exactly had happened behind the closed doors of their home. The dense forests of British Columbia, the small quiet towns with their brick houses and cozy cafes always seem to have been the backdrop for Randy Jansen's life. Langley, a small town considered by many to be a peaceful refuge, had been Randy's home since childhood. But behind this peaceful image lay difficult, stressful years full of work and dreams that did not always lead to happiness. Randy was very close to his father, who worked in a sawmill from an early age. His father became his most important mentor, teaching him everything about working with wood. When Randy graduated from high school, he decided to follow in his father's footsteps and got a job at the same sawmill. The work was physically demanding, requiring a lot of hard work and long shifts. But that was not unusual for Randy. He had been used to it since childhood. For many residents of Langley, working in the sawmill was an integral part of life, and Randy was no exception. For more than 10 years, he processed wood and hauled logs, finding his place in this routine. Despite the difficulty and monotony, the work gave him stability and a sense of fulfillment. Each day was not much different from the previous one, but for Randy, this was his way of life and his sense of belonging. The sawmill was a way for Randy to provide for his family, but he found even more joy and inspiration in music. It had accompanied him since childhood, and playing the guitar and singing eventually became an important part of his life. At the local bar in Langley, Randy often performed for the residents who came there to listen to live music and relax after work. On stage, he was transformed. Instead of a quiet and balanced man, the audience saw a charismatic artist completely immersed in music. His sincere performances were loved by the locals, and their support gave Randy a sense of importance and joy. It was in this bar that Randy once met Laurel, the woman who would soon change his life. Laurel was 6 years older, worked as a bartender, and often watched him perform. She was confident and friendly, and customers loved her for her ability to create a warm atmosphere. Initially, Randy and Laurel only talked about music, about life, but soon their topics became much deeper. They shared a common love for music and similar dreams. Laurel played the piano, and although her life had taken a different path, she always wanted to seriously pursue music. Their shared interests and mutual attraction quickly turned into something more. Work at the sawmill continued as usual, but now Laurel was in Randy's life. Their relationship became serious, and they began to make plans for the future. They felt that the town had become too small for them and dreamed of more, a life where music was not just a hobby but a central part of their shared journey. Workdays at the sawmill, performances in bars, and evenings with Laurel gave Randy's life new meaning. He had finally found what he was looking for: love, inspiration, and the desire to keep going. Randy and Laurel often thought back to the day they married in 1990. The ceremony was modest, with only the closest friends and family present, creating a cozy atmosphere. Randy sang a song for Laurel, and that was the beginning of their life together, full of love and hope. A few years after the wedding, they had their daughter Emily, and with her birth, their lives changed completely. Randy was always proud that his daughter was the best in the world, and his love for her was obvious to everyone who knew the family. When Emily turned 8, her life changed dramatically. She suffered from severe headaches that were so agonizing that she could no longer participate in music lessons. From a young age, Emily showed a talent for singing, which delighted her parents. She attended a vocal studio, won competitions, and dreamed of becoming a singer. Seeing her success, her parents did everything to support her dreams. When problems arose, Randy and Laurel couldn't understand what was happening to their daughter. Referrals to doctors and numerous tests yielded no clear answer, and they remained in the dark about her condition. Due to the severe pain, Emily had to leave school and be homeschooled as bright light and noise in the classroom triggered further attacks. Her room was always darkened, and her parents took turns caring for her, trying to alleviate her suffering. After many examinations, doctors diagnosed her with migraines. This was a severe blow to the entire family. The prescribed medications helped a little to relieve the pain but could not completely eliminate the attacks. Music, which Emily loved so much and which brought her joy, became inaccessible. Emily, who used to be cheerful and active, now withdrew more and more, spending time in silence and darkness. Randy and Laurel desperately tried to help their daughter. They tried many treatments, consulted various specialists, and looked for alternative approaches, but nothing brought the hoped-for relief. The doctor's prognosis offered little hope. Migraines are often incurable, and many people have to live with them for life. Statistics show that about 53% of migraine patients can no longer drive due to attacks. 30% have learning difficulties, and 34% have difficulty finding employment. Emily's situation was typical from a medical point of view, but this did not change her parents' fear as they watched their daughter fade away. These years were particularly difficult for Randy. Music, which used to bring him comfort, now reminded him that his daughter could no longer do what she loved. The evenings he spent playing guitar now seemed empty without Emily's voice. He no longer enjoyed performing at the local bar and began to stay home more often to support his daughter in difficult times and be there for her. When Emily began to suffer, Randy and Laurel felt completely powerless. Their cheerful and energetic daughter, who used to be full of enthusiasm, now spent most of her time in her room, avoiding light and noise. Randy continued to work, but his thoughts constantly returned to Emily, and every morning he hoped that he would find a way to alleviate her pain. By the age of 18, Emily's condition had worsened even further. Migraine attacks became more frequent and intense. Sometimes the pain lasted for days, preventing her from studying and meeting friends. Nevertheless, Emily did not give up her goals and enrolled at the University of British Columbia in the Faculty of Arts. She chose art because she dreamed of a career as an opera singer and hoped that her studies would help her get closer to that dream. For her, studying was not only a way to expand her knowledge, but also a chance to return to her normal life. Physical exhaustion and constant attacks made every day a real challenge for Emily. She tried to stay active, took singing lessons, studied music theory, art history, and literature. Despite her difficulties, Emily even participated in student activities and concerts. Her fellow students noticed her desire to actively participate in university life, even though it was difficult for her. But behind this activity was a constant battle with pain. Emily often missed classes and then caught up on her own. Due to the strong medications she took to combat her migraines, Emily constantly felt lethargic, sleepy, and weak. To relieve her symptoms, she was prescribed triptans, anticonvulsants, and antidepressants. The side effects of these medications were significant: depression, concentration problems, and physical deterioration. Over time, Emily tried to forego the medications to reduce their negative effects on her body and sought alternative methods to alleviate her suffering. She began to meditate, do breathing exercises, place cold compresses on her head, and avoid triggers like bright light, strong odors, and loud noises. The room became her sanctuary where she could hide from everything that exacerbated her pain. When the pain became unbearable, Emily stayed in the darkened room, avoiding light and noise, while her parents Randy and Laurel took turns caring for her and trying to do something to alleviate her suffering. Despite the hardships, Emily tried to continue her life as before. She continued to meet with her friends, even though the meetings became less frequent due to her health. Sometimes she had to cancel plans at the last minute because of a sudden attack, but her friends never left her alone. They came to her house, spent time with her, and tried to support her so that she wouldn't feel lonely. Emily recognized the limitations her illness brought, but she didn't want to give up what was important to her. Her desire to return to a normal life and continue making music remained constant despite the challenges. On May 7, 2015, Randy Jansen posted something on Facebook that shocked everyone who knew him. In this post, he admitted that in the last 10 days he had committed acts that were unjustifiable. First, he described his daughter Emily, calling her the best daughter ever. Gifted, intelligent, and kind. He recalled how she filled their house with laughter and was always there for them, even when she herself was suffering. But her illness took many opportunities from her and forced her to give up her dreams. Emily had suffered from migraines since childhood. The constant pain led to depression, and days of uninterrupted pain became her reality. Randy described how Emily looked at her classmates who lived normal lives while she spent time in the hospital or sat in the darkness of her room. Despite all this, she never stopped hoping for the best and dreaming of the future, but her condition remained unchanged. Randy often told his friends that Emily was the meaning of his life and that he could not live if she were no longer there. His helplessness, seeing his daughter suffer, and his inability to change anything drove him to despair. He shared his worries with his friends, and everyone understood how difficult it was for him. At some point, Randy made a decision that changed everything. In his posting, he revealed that he took a weapon and shot his daughter to free her from her misery. He described the moment he imagined Emily free of pain, like an angel floating above the clouds. Then he shot his wife Laurel because he didn't want her to live with the grief of losing their daughter. A few days later, he killed his sister Shelley so she wouldn't have to be ashamed of his deed. Randy wrote about how Emily tried to heal in every possible way. She was strong, but the illness took hold of her. He could no longer bear to watch her suffer and felt completely powerless every day because he knew there was nothing he could do to help. Randy often told his friends that he would do anything for his daughter and finally did what he considered the only way out. After these events, it became clear how deep his despair was. When Randy Jansen published his Facebook post, several friends and acquaintances immediately contacted the police. They were disturbed by what they read and wanted to make sure Randy's family was okay. The content of the post was shocking, and many could not believe what had happened. After numerous calls, including one from Brian Jones, the police quickly sent a patrol to Randy's house. Brian Jones, one of Randy's closest friends, experienced fear and confusion after reading the message. At first, he hoped it was a mistake or a bad joke, but when he saw the caption with the nickname Randy had used since high school, he realized that the words really belonged to his friend. Brian recognized the seriousness of the situation and immediately took action. He excused himself from work and drove to Shelley's house. While he tried to call Randy, all calls went unanswered, which only increased his apprehension. When Brian stopped in front of Shelley's house, he noticed a stack of unopened newspapers on the porch. It struck him as strange, as Shelley was always responsible and never left her tasks undone. Her old delivery van was parked in front of the house, and the curtains on the windows were tightly drawn. There was no sign of life. Brian knocked on the door several times, but no one opened. The entire area felt strange and unsettling. After the death of her parents, Shelley had led a secluded life. She lived alone, had no children, and rarely had contact with neighbors. Her main occupation was delivering newspapers, and she was always punctual with this work. The undelivered newspapers immediately alarmed Brian. He felt that something serious had happened and decided to call the police. The officer on duty informed him that Brian was not the first to report such a thing and that a patrol had already been dispatched to investigate the case. At the end of his post, Randy wrote that his family was now in heaven and no longer in pain. He expressed his regret, took full responsibility, and apologized to everyone he might have hurt. The post ended with the words, "Rest in peace, my little family." When Brian read this, he suffered a deep shock. He had always known Randy as a kind man who would not want to do evil and could not believe that the man even owned a weapon. He remembered the love with which Randy spoke of his family and could not understand how his friend had dared to do such a thing. The police initially tried to contact Randy Jansen, who was inside his house. He was seen through a first-floor window with a shotgun in his hands. Officers used loudspeakers to try and reach him, but Randy did not respond. The officers realized that the situation was extremely tense and that they had to proceed cautiously so as not to provoke him to further aggressive actions. The house was cordoned off and negotiations began, but Randy showed no signs of cooperation. A few hours later, the confrontation escalated into something more dangerous. Randy set the house on fire, and police officers noticed smoke rising from the top floor. An attempt to break in was unsuccessful. The fire spread too quickly and blocked access. Officers saw a body wrapped in a sheet on the ground floor but could not get close enough to identify it. Within minutes, the flames engulfed the entire house and the officers had to retreat. When firefighters arrived at the scene, the building was already fully engulfed in flames and beyond saving. The flames raged so fiercely that access to the building was impossible even days after the fire was extinguished. It was not until May, 3 days after the fire, that investigators were able to enter the building and begin their examination. 3 bodies were found in the burned remains of the house. 19-year-old Emily was found in her room, her body wrapped in a sheet. 5-year-old Laurel lay in the kitchen, also wrapped in a blanket. Investigators determined that both had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head and had been murdered 10 days before Randy's Facebook post. Randy's own body was found in a second-floor bedroom. He had shot himself before setting the house on fire. Judging by the remains of the weapon and the position of the body, he was in a deep emotional crisis and had decided to voluntarily end his life. When police arrived at the house of Shelley, Randy's sister, they found her body in the living room. Shelley had been shot twice in the head, and her body was also covered with a blanket. The medical examiner determined that Shelley had been dead for 2 days before she was discovered. There were no signs of a struggle at the crime scene, suggesting that Randy had surprised her. Emily's condition had deteriorated so much that doctors began giving her morphine injections in the last year to relieve her unbearable pain. These injections were a last resort, and neighbors often saw her parents bringing her home from the hospital. Emily was so weak that her parents supported her to walk home. These were difficult moments for everyone who knew the family. Randy Jansen, Emily's father, always tried to take care of his family despite all the difficulties. A year before the tragedy, he went to his family doctor because of insomnia and constant stress. He told the doctor about his worries and how difficult it was to see his daughter suffer. The doctor suggested tranquilizers and advised rest, but Randy refused the medication, believing it would not solve the problem. Brian Jones, a friend of Randy's, recalled that he never spoke of having bad thoughts or wanting to harm anyone. He described him as a quiet and hardworking person who was always ready to help. For Randy, his family always came first, and no one could imagine that he was capable of such acts. Brian noted, however, that Randy had reached his breaking point. He could no longer bear to see his daughter suffer and finally made a terrible decision. Many neighbors who had known Randy since childhood could not believe what had happened. They said that such acts were not like Randy, who had always been a friendly and calm person, never showing aggression or cruelty. Everything that happened seemed to be the result of despair and the inability to cope with the pain and suffering of his family. A neighbor remembered Randy saying that if his daughter left him, he would have nothing left to live for. Despite these words, Randy lived in a house with the bodies of his wife and daughter for 10 days before voluntarily ending his life. Emily's last tweet came 4 days before the tragedy. "I complain about the pain, but at least I'm here to feel it. And I thank God I'm alive." This post showed her desire to live despite the suffering she experienced. Her messages always reflected the struggle for life. Despite her illness, she tried to maintain a positive attitude even when the situation seemed hopeless. Emily was a kind young woman who always tried to stay in touch with the world around her. She loved music and sang in the local church when her health permitted, and many people in Langley remembered her performances. However, as her condition worsened, she was seen less and less in church. Nevertheless, she remained attentive to her neighbors, cooked with her mother and shared treats with them, and helped the neighborhood children with their lessons when she felt better. Laurel, Emily's mother, did her best to support her daughter. In one of her Twitter posts, she wrote, "Emily is back in the hospital. I pray to God that she gets help. I feel helpless." These words express the pain and despair she felt seeing her daughter suffer. Laurel was on the verge of a nervous breakdown, but she did not give up and continued to look for ways to alleviate Emily's condition. Shelley, Randy's sister, also could not foresee the tragedy that would occur. No one in the family had expected their fate to be decided in this way. In the past year, Randy had often complained to friends that he could not cope with the workload and stress from his daughter's illness. No one could imagine that Randy would ever get into such an emotional state that he would decide to kill his family. As I said before, Emily maintained a Twitter account where she shared her thoughts. Her post showed that she did not want to give up. Shortly before the tragedy, she also wrote, "For the first time in 2 years, I am pain-free for 12 hours. I am so tired of the pain, but I have to keep going." It was her determination to fight despite all odds. Randy could not handle the emotional burden. Laurel also suffered as she watched her daughter fade, and her Twitter posts reflected her pain. Despite their despair, the whole family tried to support each other, but the situation got worse and worse, and none of them could foresee where it would lead. Now that everything has come to light, one can see how despair, hidden suffering, and feelings of hopelessness led to a tragedy that no one expected. The story of the Jansen family is a reminder that even behind the strongest walls, horrors can lurk that will one day find their way out. If you liked the video, feel free to give it a like. That helps a lot with distribution. Also, leave a comment to support the channel and recommend the video. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new videos. Thanks for watching and take care. If one takes on too much, one must be aware that there is a risk of not being able to cope with it, because one's strength is not infinite. In such a situation, it is worthwhile to review one's own life and cut out the unnecessary. The most important thing is not to go to extremes, as in today's story. For the staff of the medical center in Springfield, Missouri, USA, June 2013 was very stressful. When 24-year-old Stott was brought to the hospital, she was in a bad condition, lost consciousness, and screamed in pain when she came to. A brain hemorrhage and kidney failure were diagnosed. All her organs failed and then began to work chaotically again. The doctors could not understand what was happening to the young patient, who was literally fading before their eyes. The fight for Sarah's life lasted several days. Finally, the police were called when an anonymous tip came in. The person reported that the Stott family had been suffering from strange illnesses for a year, which were costing them their lives. First, Sarah's father, named Mark, then her brother, named Sean. Both died before they could receive medical help. Now it was Sarah's turn. She was much luckier because she came to a medical center, otherwise she would have died long ago. The police began to find out what mysterious illness the Stott family was confronted with. The investigators believed that none of this was a coincidence. It was a large family of 6. Mark and Diane were parents to Sean and 3 daughters, Sarah, Rachel, and Brian. Mark Stott was born in 1961 in St. Louis and was the head of the family. He met his future wife in Texas when he was studying in college. The young people seemed to be opposites from the start, but soon found common ground and began dating. Mark was always positive, creative, and played in a band, while Diane seemed to be a somewhat more complex person, reserved and rather introverted. The relationship between the two developed quickly. Soon she became pregnant, whereupon they immediately decided to have a wedding. After Sean's birth, Diane continued her studies, graduated from nursing school, and then worked in the cardiology department of the hospital. And Mark became a housewife and took care of the house and children. Apparently, the wife was more concerned with professional success and actively worked to provide the family with everything necessary. The young mother was looking for a better place with a high income. Several moves were even necessary until I finally settled the Stott family in Springfield, Missouri. It is a quiet town, perfect for children and family life. It was also Diane's hometown. a rather conservative and religious place, but here she felt safest. In the following years of marriage, 3 girls were born. As it looked, they seemed to be a perfect family, but not everything went so smoothly. So Sean suffered from health problems from a young age. During his school years, the young man was diagnosed with autism, which is why he required special conditions. Despite the efforts of the head of the family, the girls also had problems with learning at school. And this particularly affected Sarah. But even that was not the family's main problem. They simply did not have enough money for a fulfilling life. With the newcomers, one person could no longer provide for everyone else. In addition, they had to buy a new house as the old one was no longer big enough. Of course, Mark also occasionally participated in the family household when he had an occasional income. Sometimes he worked as a bartender, but above all, he dedicated his time to his children. In his free time, he was creative. He wrote music, songs, played several musical instruments. It is not surprising that he began performing with his music group. All of this brought some income, but it was still not enough for such a large family. Despite the problems, it seemed as if they were jointly ready to overcome all difficulties. At least, that's how it looked until April 8, 2012. The day after Mark's 61st birthday, the police were called to the house where the family lived. There they found the man's body, which was already cold. According to the wife, he died of an unknown flu-like illness that rapidly progressed and ended in a fatal seizure. Diane said that her husband had been suffering from an unknown illness for several days. She spent all her time with him to relieve his pain, but Mark's condition was getting worse. The circumstances seemed strange, and the body itself also looked unusual. Above all, the deceased's skin was noticeably yellower than that of a healthy person. Lout Diane, Mark had a seizure on the day of his death. Although her husband had never suffered from anything like it, she believed it was related to his age. The wife said that she wanted to take Mark to the hospital immediately after the seizure, but he insisted that he wanted to stay home and recover. Nevertheless, the wife did not listen to him and started packing. But when she was finished, she found her husband without any signs of life. Minutes had passed since the seizure. She immediately notified emergency services. After a cursory examination, nothing suspicious could be determined. The death certificate stated that he had died of natural causes, with the deceased's age being mentioned. Sean was very worried about his father during this time. He described on his social media page all the symptoms the man was suffering from and doubted the natural cause of death. Diane insisted that her husband's body should be cremated. Afterwards, his ashes were scattered over the local lake near the church. Mark's death was a real shock for everyone. He was strong, healthy, and active. It was strange that the man gave up so abruptly, however. This incident did not arouse as much suspicion as the next tragedy that befell the Stott family. 5 months had passed when the police were called to another house on September 2, 2012, albeit for similar reasons. It was a large house, more suitable for such a family. Diane and her children lived there. She had acquired the new house by selling the old house and receiving the insurance payout for her husband's death. Diane reported that she found her 26-year-old son Shan dead in his room on that fateful day. Here too, the situation was similar to the progressive flu that the young man's father had not survived. This time the mother, who had an unpleasant experience after the death of her spouse, had time to react and took her son to the doctor on the second day after the onset of symptoms. The doctor found nothing suspicious in him except for a water imbalance in his body. Afterwards, the boy's condition continued to worsen, but his mother did not take him to the doctor. In her opinion, he refused the doctor's help and felt unwell. The mother attributed this behavior to autism. On the night before his death, the boy began to feel better. She assumed that the unknown illness had receded and went to church with her daughters in the morning to pray for Sean. Her son was sleeping, but when she came back, he showed no signs of life. Apparently, he had tried to get out of bed and had fallen, so he was lying on the floor. A pool of blood flowed from his mouth. For everyone, the death of such a young man was a shock. He himself worked in a center for people with disabilities, and everyone described him as very positive and friendly. Like Mark's body, Sean was also cremated and his ashes were scattered over the lake. About 9 months passed before the next incident occurred to the family. In June 2013, the family's eldest daughter, Sarah, was hospitalized with similar symptoms to those her brother and father had died from. The police arrived at the hospital 2 days after Sarah had been admitted in critical condition. The doctors fought for her life but could not tell the police anything concrete. The medical professionals were still trying to find out the cause of the strange flu-like illness. It was strange, however, that her kidneys and brain failed. The medical professionals conducted numerous tests. They did not dare to say it out loud, but they already suspected then that Sarah had been poisoned. As the police found out, she was led to the medical center by an anonymous call from the church, the same church the Stott family attended and where Diane had played the organ for many years. The pastor did not believe it was an accident and feared that the murderer would go unpunished, which is why he notified the police. The man described his suspicions. He believed that Mark's death and Sarah's critical condition might be connected. According to the driver, the first death, that of Mark, seemed strange to him. He was healthy until the last moment, and when a young man of years died under similar circumstances, the pastor seriously suspected Diane of being involved in these incidents. During this time, the woman told everyone that her daughter was just sick, while she behaved like a grieving widow and mother whose relatives died under unknown circumstances. As a result, she received the full support of the religious community. The pastor, however, believed that Diane deliberately used this mask to avoid questions on uncomfortable topics. The last time the woman visited her daughter in the hospital, she behaved quite differently. The nurses said she was in good spirits even when she first brought in the dying Sarah. She made jokes and generally spoke more about her daughter's health condition than about her upcoming trip to Florida. All of this happened despite the very alarming prognoses of the doctors. They were not sure if she would even survive this mysterious illness, and the mother didn't seem to care. All of this only strengthened the authorities' suspicion. However, since Diane had nothing to show, she was asked to come to the police station voluntarily to speak with the police. She agreed. On June 20, 2013, she reported to the police station. By this time, Sarah's condition had become somewhat more stable, but none of the tests conducted by the medical professionals showed any poisons in her body. It seemed as if they had been completely processed and left no traces. The investigators realized that they had to be very careful if they were likely dealing with a poisoner because the bodies of Sean and Mark had been cremated. They were burned, which meant no tests could be performed on them. That made it very difficult to investigate their deaths. Therefore, the investigators hoped that Sarah would survive and help with the investigation. From their mother, they wanted to learn the circumstances of the victim's last days to get as many clues as possible about the reasons for the deterioration of their condition. The story Diane told was similar to Sean's death. She had gone to church with her other daughters on that fateful day, and when she returned, she noticed that her eldest daughter was doing very badly. Previously, Sarah had suffered from similar symptoms to her brother and father for a few days, though in a milder form. That's why the woman didn't panic and didn't go to the doctors. She believed that they couldn't help anyway. When Diane came home and saw Sarah's condition, she finally sent her to the hospital. The first thing the woman wondered was whether her daughter wanted to take her own life voluntarily. Sarah suffered from bipolar disorder, so she might have done something to herself. The mother went through all the medications available to Sarah. She kept saying that her daughter no longer wanted to live. There had already been numerous similar incidents where Sarah had cut her wrists. It all sounded as if the woman was stubbornly trying to convince the police of her version of the story. Diane did not learn that in parallel, the deaths of Mark and Sean were also being investigated because their deaths were now considered suspicious. The authorities did not want to scare off the potential perpetrator. Meanwhile, Sarah was in the hospital and the doctors were still looking for the poison. Meanwhile, Diane behaved quite strangely. As she answered questions, she began to reveal that Sarah was a very difficult child who couldn't find a job, had been learning poorly lately, and had high tuition fees to pay. Her revelations sounded like an excuse for certain behavior. All of this seemed strange because hardly anyone would think about such things when their daughter was dying in the hospital. Then the main suspect began to talk about her dislike for her husband, who hardly worked and spent all his free time on entertainment. The investigators just listened to the woman as she made one revelation after another. Diane confessed that she had always thought Sarah was disturbed because of her bipolar disorder. She continued to live with her family and never intended to move out. Her mother admitted that for a long time she had even hoped that she would take her own life. Now it seemed as if it had happened. Diane repeated several times that she would not harm her relatives. After some time, however, she was led to an unexpected confession. The widow told the investigators that her husband and children had drunk antifreeze. With that, everything was clear, because poisoning with this substance is indeed very dangerous and shows similar symptoms to a whole complex of chemical compounds, making it difficult to identify. It leads to a slow and agonizing death. The woman even admitted to having drunk antifreeze herself, as she had for some reason observed the family doing so. Of course, the investigators did not believe these absurd stories. The suspicion was quickly confirmed when they checked her browser history. As it turned out, she had begun searching for information on the signs and methods of poisoning long before her husband's death. Among other things, she was interested in antifreeze. She was obviously looking for the most effective and inconspicuous killing agents, considering various drugs, minerals, and essential oils that have an overwhelming effect on the body. The woman was not sparse with words, so several queries sounded very provocative. E.g., how do I kill my husband? How do people with bipolar disorder kill themselves? All of this indicated the planning of murders long before her husband's death. When Diane was asked about all this during a subsequent interrogation, she denied guilt. But after a lengthy interrogation, the suspect admitted that her husband's demise did not look as it was originally told. When Mark had a seizure, the woman made sure there were no more signs of life and then waited another 5 minutes to be certain he would not be saved. According to Diane's own statement, she did this because she hated her husband. Everyone described the man as a very good-natured and intelligent person. The hatred was probably triggered by the couple's handling of the family budget. Diane simply couldn't cope with the workload anymore, as she was the main breadwinner of the family, but couldn't wait for her spouse's help. She felt exactly the same hatred for her son Sean. His mother couldn't look at him because she considered him the real problem of the family. Because of his difficulties, he only sought understanding and warmth from his mother, but instead she constantly threw him out of the room whenever her son came in. To make matters worse, Sean began to harbor suspicions when he researched his father's illness. When Mark died, Diane realized that she could no longer tolerate her sick son, and she began pouring antifreeze into his drinks every day. It only took a few days for a lethal dose of the substance to be reached. At least that's what it sounded like from the woman's words, but that was a lie. The man had been agonizingly dying for over a week before he finally left this world. Now her attention and dissatisfaction turned to her eldest daughter. In the mother's eyes, Sarah became the main problem of the family. Sarah spent too much money on an education that, however, was doomed to failure due to her mediocrity. She dreamed of becoming a French translator, took out a student loan that had to be repaid soon after college graduation. But Sarah had no career prospects, and her mother refused to pay her debts. Diane hated Sarah for not being able to find a job and solve her financial problems herself. 4 days before she was hospitalized, her mother began mixing antifreeze into her food. At the police station, she confessed that she had sent her daughter to the hospital so quickly because she couldn't stand the situation and her suffering. Of course, the woman felt no pity. The story that she wanted to kill painlessly also turned out to be a delusion. In fact, she had prepared drinks in advance that consisted of almost half antifreeze. Diane had stocked up on cola bottles with which, according to experts, one could kill up to 30 people at once. All of this was stored in the refrigerator to systematically poison her family. This seemed particularly disturbing as her two other daughters were still in the house. Brianna, for example, who was just 12 years old. The mother, however, was not afraid that her youngest daughter might accidentally consume the drink. After all, she had already planned to kill her. Right after Sarah's death, they needed physical evidence to convict the woman. Despite the cremation of her husband's and son's bodies, some fragments of Mark and Sean could be found during the autopsy. The investigators offered to examine these to determine if the deadly substance had left traces in the bodies of the two. The tests revealed the presence of ethylene glycol, the main component of antifreezes. Before arresting the poisoner, the police decided to find out if she had an accomplice, as it was difficult to realize all of this alone. It is hard to imagine that the suspect managed to keep all the people close to her in the dark. The investigators told Diane nothing of their intentions and simply arrested her. And then another daughter of the woman was summoned for questioning, Rachel, the year-old. She was immediately informed that her mother had confessed to poisoning the family. Her reaction was striking. She was very nervous and obviously knew more than she said. The investigators simply wanted to speak with her to learn more about what was happening in the house. Even before Diane's confession, Rachel had behaved strangely. She laughed and made inappropriate jokes, even though it was about the death of her family members, but she never admitted anything. When suspicion arose, the police decided to check their suspicions and conducted several searches in the family's apartment. They found a diary, which proved to be a valuable source of information that revealed the full extent of the villainy. Strange was the entry in which Rachel concluded that her father and then her brother would soon die. She managed to calm herself down by thinking that she would have money and her father's car. Particularly disturbing was that the entry was made a few months before Mark's death. All of this clearly indicated that Rachel knew about her mother's terrifying plans and didn't even try to stop her or warn her relatives. Apparently, she resigned herself to the fact that her entire family was about to die. When Rachel was shown the diary, she had obviously not expected such a turn of events. Rachel quickly broke down. She confessed that she had been her mother's accomplice from the beginning. The complicity began when the daughter helped Diane search for methods and poison on the internet. They even discovered that a bittering agent had been added to commercially sold antifreeze to prevent accidental ingestion. It was not suitable for poisoning and was therefore bought online. When the woman implemented her insidious plan, she prepared poisoned food and drinks, which her daughter passed on to her father, her brother, and even her sister. According to her confession, they poisoned each family member up to 3 times a day. The idea with the antifreeze was suggested by Rachel. According to her, she had the best relationship with her mother out of all family members, and Rachel was always the favorite daughter. Like Diane, she didn't like the others and considered them a burden. So both decided to get rid of them and start a new life. The Stott family was stunned when Rachel published the following message on her social media page a month after her brother's death. "I don't think I've seen my mother so relaxed in a long time." Both seemed satisfied with this development. She revealed that they had discussed each of the murders in detail, that Mark should be killed. They both agreed on that, but with Sean, Rachel was not sure. She was of the opinion that her brother did not need to be killed but could simply be taken to a special hospital and remain there forever. Rachel even argued with her mother about her brother, as she didn't want him to die. Later, however, she agreed that it would be better to eliminate him. Of course, she referred to the fact that she was under Diane's power, but the mere fact that she argued with her raised doubts about her mother's total control. It seemed as if mother and daughter were equally involved in planning the poisoning of their loved ones. Rachel stated that Sarah's poisoning had been a surprise to her. She believed that the main reason was not even money or her debts, but merely a trivial argument. Sarah and her mother constantly argued. Diane found her very annoying. As for 12-year-old Brianna, Rachel's comments about her were vague. From her words, it emerged that the teenager was also perceived as a burden, which is why the youngest family member was to be eliminated. Finally, Diane learned of her daughter's confession and offered to tell the whole truth to be credible, as there was no longer any point in lying. She agreed. According to the widow, her hatred for her husband began because she did not feel attracted to him. Furthermore, she was annoyed by his extravagance and his complete inability to keep the family afloat. The woman accused him of physical and verbal abuse and domestic violence. However, these statements were not confirmed by any person familiar with the deceased. In an attempt to deflect blame from herself, she added that her husband was also a con artist. But here too, no one from Mark's closest circle, including his band whom he saw almost daily, confirmed these statements. Even in Rachel's diary, it was written that her father was an exemplary family man and would rather hurt himself than anyone else. Although Rachel and Diane repeatedly stated feelings of bitterness, the investigators believed that the motive for the murders was rather trivial. Specifically, life insurance policies were taken out on each family member. With the payout after her husband's death, the widow was able to buy a new, larger house, and that was just the beginning of her insidious plan. Life insurance policies were also taken out for Sean and Sarah, from which Diane intended to profit. Rachel's diary provided insight into her worries about the events. All of this was investigated to be used at the hearing. Finally, Diane admitted why it had been decided to take Sarah to the hospital, unlike the other two victims. As it turned out, Rachel simply didn't want someone else to die in their new home again. That is, they were not concerned about Sarah's death. They simply saw a dying loved one as a burden like all the others. Rachel justified this behavior with genuine distress. She recounted that she had numerous experiences related to her dead brother. One image stuck in her mind. He lay on the floor in a pool of blood near his mouth with cold, pale hands and glassy eyes. Afterwards, she moved into his room and repeatedly wrote in her diary that she was very disturbed during that time. She had nightmares in which Sean appeared. Rachel and Diane were arrested and charged with first-degree murder. They were not released on bail. The Lutheran church that the Stott family attended drafted an appeal on behalf of the entire congregation with words of support during this difficult time. Although the pastor himself went to the police and expressed his suspicions, he was the one who initiated the letter. He prayed for their souls. Rachel pleaded guilty and agreed to testify against her mother. She took responsibility for 2 counts of second-degree murder, as well as attempted second-degree murder. For these charges, she received a total of 2 life sentences, with the possibility of parole after 42 years. This means she can be released in 2055 when she will be 64 years old. During the sentencing, she apologized to her sister Sarah, who survived the poisoning. She learned to walk and speak again and underwent a long rehabilitation phase. Rachel then requested the conversion of her sentence and demanded a retrial, as she was afraid of the male lawyer. She claimed she had been intimidated by him and that he had forced her into these confessions. Furthermore, no psychiatric assessment was presented to her. Rachel began to claim that she had some kind of psychological problems. This appeal was eventually rejected, whereupon she made no further attempts to seek leniency. Diane Stott was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. She used vague formulations until the very end and refused to fully confess her guilt. The woman was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. In one of her last interviews, Diane insisted that she had nothing to do with her husband's death and claimed that his addiction to alcohol and illegal substances was to blame. The man had gotten involved with dangerous people and suffered from it. At that point, the woman was so fed up with her husband and hated him so much that she didn't even want to help him. When Mark passed away, she was relieved. No evidence of Mark's addiction was ever found. This new version of Diane's story contradicted the diary entries and Rachel's statement, so no one believed her. Sarah's life would never be the same again. She never fully recovered from the severe poisoning, lives in a special center, and has a guardian. She dreams of her dead father and brother and believes that they watch over her like guardian angels. Sarah has forgiven her mother and sister and is not angry with them due to her faith. She is very religious and spends a lot of time in church. She hopes to fulfill her dreams of becoming a French translator and visiting Paris. Thanks for watching and take care.